Philip Grubauer holds on to get a win for the Seattle Kraken, a shutout over the Arizona Coyotes. We're going to talk about last night's game and what can we expect from the Seattle Kraken moving forward in the goaltending position. We've got an update on Joey Daccord coming up on today's episode of Locked On Kraken.
You are Locked On Kraken, your daily podcast on the Seattle Kraken, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We are the Seattle Kraken.
Hey, what do you say, Seattle hockey fans? Welcome to another episode of Locked On Kraken, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. My name is Erica L. Ayala. I am your host, have always been your host of Locked On Kraken, going on strong for 3 seasons, although this one coming to a premature end, at least compared to last year. But I also am a contributor over at CBS Sports. We've got the WNBA draft coming up. We'll be talking about that and also contribute on CBS Sports HQ and on cbssports.com to NHL coverage. Today's episode of Locked On Kraken brought to you from one of my favorites, I'm not going to lie, and that's Game Time. I tell you all the time, I travel a lot, and when I do, and when I'm looking for entertainment in whatever city I happen to be in, I head over to Game Time and make sure that you download the Game Time app, use promo code LOCKEDONNHL, and that will get you $20 off your first purchase. And if you happen to be in Seattle and you happen to have head over to Climate Pledge Arena, now whether you had a ticket or you were just kind of checking out the scenes from all those windows, you would have seen that the Seattle Kraken, they get a pretty nice win over the Arizona Coyotes. Now, I know I had said I was curious if we would see Joey Daccord in net, but we did not. We saw Philip Grubauer. This was his 4th consecutive start and a really great performance from Philip Grubauer, maybe almost too good. He had to make 39 saves in the Seattle Kraken's win. The good news is that it was a win, but again, maybe some things to indicate how the Kraken want to continue to improve in this game. Let's start with what we liked. We definitely liked that early goal from Shane Wright. He talked to media saying, they don't ask you how, they just ask you how many, one of those hockeyisms. But he scores within the first minute of the game. And then Andre Burakovsky, on a power play nonetheless, scores in the next minute and, like 8-10 seconds or so. Of course, Allison Lucan was doing her amazing analysis and gave us a thumbs up for a positive, or I would say a positive, but a response goal. That means we scored within 2 minutes of one of our other goals. So love that. Justin Schultz got in on the party in the second period. Tanev, who had a lot of hustle in this game, usually does. I have been a little bit worried about Brandon Tanev. He might be one of those bubble players for the Seattle Kraken coming up in this offseason, but he scored in the third period. And then Will Borgen also getting in on the action. Great game also by Ollie Bjorkstrand. 2 points for him. I think overall a balanced attack. What I was a little bit worried about, though, was Philip Grubauer, putting a little bit too much emphasis on Philip Grubauer, who got his 22nd NHL shutout, but 39 saves. And we've talked about this before. The defensive effort from the Seattle Kraken is not always certainly where I want to see it. And I think in a game like this, we have to be able to be disciplined defensively. That's going to be the next step. But we know the Seattle Kraken, they're eliminated from playoff contention. So a lot of this is forward thinking about what the Seattle Kraken can do in the off season. Here we go. Finally, I was having a little trouble with the natural stat trick pull down, but I want to show you, of course, I love to show you the heat map. So this is a good thing in that the Seattle Kraken get the win. Arizona was looking for a sweep. Like, if you get swept by Arizona, like, no wonder we're not a playoff team. But here's what I want to show you, because even in this win, there's some things that I just don't want to see, Seattle. And here's one of them. I talked about, no offense to the Arizona Coyotes, but I mean, come on. They are a team that on paper we should be able to beat. And here's this game flow. We had just barely have the lion's share of the kind of momentum in this game, and then it's all Arizona. And the only reason we don't see them score here is because of Philip Grubauer. So there are still some things that this Seattle Kraken squad, as they are playing for pride, I talked about it weeks ago, they are playing for pride now, but also playing just to get some consistency. Dave Hakstol said it the other day, some guys are playing for jobs, whether that's with the Seattle Kraken or otherwise. So there's still a lot that needs to be done, and it doesn't get easier for the Seattle Kraken. We know they're already eliminated from playoff contention, but we've got Dallas coming up. Well, I should say San Jose Sharks first, and then Dallas coming up. We've got St. Louis, Winnipeg, and Minnesota. I believe all of those teams are in playoff contention, or have been. I'll be honest with y'all. I know I mentioned this a few days ago, but I haven't been keeping as diligent a look at the standings as I was when the Seattle Kraken were in it. But here we go. The Western Conference, yeah, you've got Dallas has already clinched, Winnipeg has already clinched, and then we know that Nashville, I always hold a special place in my heart for Nashville. And listen, St. Louis Locked On Blues actually tweeted at us the other day, but Vegas and St. Louis are in contention for the last two playoff spots. Now, listen, I know there's some people in the comments that are really like, if the Seattle Kraken can't help eliminate Vegas from the playoffs, then this was an absolute failure of a season. I'm not saying that we lose. I'm just making an observation. You've got Vegas, St. Louis, and Minnesota. So yeah, St. Louis and Minnesota, we play, all vying for a playoff spot. Am I advocating to lose games to St. Louis and Minnesota? Basically, they are sandwiched in between our penultimate game of the season? Absolutely not. I'm just making an observation. So Vegas, I guess you're on your own. I would love it if they also did not make the playoffs, but that's a little bit of a penny me. But that's out of our control. What we can control is our defensive effort, and we're going to need to against teams that are fighting for their playoff lives. This is where we have to improve. And I want to talk about in the next segment a great article by Kate Shefty talking, of course, about Shane Wright. And as I have been on the podcast, about how it's almost a 180 between how we felt about Shane Wright last year in his NHL appearances and how we feel about him this season. So what does that mean? What still needs to be done to get Shane Wright up to the big leagues? Is this something that we're going to see next year? And why are we going to have to enjoy Shane while we can before he goes to compete in Coachella Valley? More than likely. I mean, I'm thinking, especially the way this season is going, it doesn't make sense to have him pass the NHL threshold. But we'll talk about that coming up on today's episode of Locked On Kraken. Today's episode of Locked On Kraken brought to you by our friends at Indeed. If you need to hire, then you absolutely need Indeed. Listen, we know as we talk about roster fits and things like that on Locked On Kraken, that when you're drafting your team, you want to handpick the best stars for your team. And that's exactly what Indeed can help you do for your business. So Indeed will help you find top talent fast with Indeed's suite of powerful hiring tools like matching, assessments, and even virtual interviews. Hate waiting? Indeed's US data shows that over 80% of Indeed employers find quality candidates whose resumes on Indeed match their job description the moment they sponsor a job. So Indeed knows that when you're growing your own business, you have to make every dollar count. And that's why with Indeed, you only pay for quality applications that match your must-have job requirements. So visit Indeed.com/locked-on to start hiring now. Just go to Indeed.com/locked-on. Indeed.com/locked-on. Terms and conditions apply. Cost per application pricing not available for everyone. But remember, if you need to hire, then you need Indeed. Thanks as always for making Locked On Kraken a part of your daily destination. I want to remind you that Locked On Sports Today is our 24/7 streaming channel. You can find expert analysis all throughout the NHL playoffs on Locked On Sports Today. There will be a special emphasis on the teams that some of them I mentioned in the first segment that will be in the playoff run. So we are definitely going to be keeping an eye on that. Make sure you head over to our YouTube page, Locked On Sports Today. You can also watch on your Amazon TV using the channels, the Amazon Fire TV using the channels app. Let's get back into it. I mentioned Kate Shefty had a great article here talking about Shane Wright, titled "Shane Wright Scores Again. Philip Grubauer Makes 39 Saves as Kraken Blank Coyotes." Arr! So anyway, the mood surrounding top Kraken prospect Shane Wright's recall has progressed from cautious optimism to full-blown positivity. Does that sound like you? Does that sound like you? I mean, I knew I was super excited to see what Shane could do. I don't think I was cautiously optimistic by any stretch of the imagination because I'd been keeping up with what he'd been doing in Coachella Valley. I liked the way that we handled his development this year. And there were times where even me on this podcast, Locked On Kraken, I'm looking at our injuries, I'm looking at how we're performing, and I'm like, why the heck aren't we bringing Shane Wright up? I still don't officially know that answer, but I hope that what we're seeing is giving Shane Wright the time to develop, giving him the time to build some chemistry has paid dividends. So I love Kate Shefty's article here. Just that's where I got, they all count the same on the score sheet, is the direct quote. So I kind of, I remixed it a little, but they all count the same on the score sheet. Lucky bounce, that's for sure. Shane Wright said, we didn't get the video files after this game, so I'm glad that Kate had that in her article. Some in the article, Kate also likening what we're seeing from Shane to what we saw from Matty Beniers a few years ago, talking about he's with Eberle and Schwartz. So, again, Jared McCann out of the lineup. He's dealing with an injury. So is Vince Dunn. Those are two guys that we have on extensions now. Eberle also one of them. Hate to see that they're injured. But we did get to see, I mentioned Burakovsky. He's been doing pretty well here. So I love this development for Shane Wright. But at the end of the article, again, we hear or we read that Kate is wondering, how much more time are we actually going to get with Shane Wright? And that's just because, he has 2 games out of the remaining that he can play this season without, quote, triggering the start of his 3-year entry-level contract. So again, I don't know that it makes sense to have him for the remainder of the games when his threshold is going to tap out 2 games into that. There's like 5 games left in the season. So I think you just kind of let him go back, have a deep, what we hope, I should say, is going to be a deep playoff run with the Coachella Valley Firebirds, continue to develop, and then he holds on to this. I also liked, and I didn't talk about this the other day, or I should say, I did talk about why we weren't seeing some of the young talent, but what Dave Hakstol has said to us in the last handful of days is that a part of that was the development process. Get them in the game, let them see some action, and then I'm kind of paraphrasing here. But what Dave wanted to see is also to give the younger guys some opportunity to observe the game from a distance and then come back to the ice and put it all together. So I actually really like that development plan. I myself have been impatient at times with the development plan. I said the same with Shane Wright. So I like that development plan. Dave is pretty forthcoming. He'll give us detail after the fact, but certainly not before. So, I appreciate him walking through that. I mentioned that he also gave an update on Joey Decord. Said Joey was kind of dealing with something, didn't get into any detail, didn't sound like something that they were worried about per se, but they wanted to make sure that it wasn't something that would be more than just nagging or lingering, and that could become a problem. So shut him down a little bit. That's why we've seen a lot of Philip Grubauer. He answered questions about the goalie tandem again today. So if Joey Dax is good to go, I think we probably will see him before the season ends. And if we don't, likely it's because of this nagging injury. That being said, and the reason I wanted to talk about Joey Decord and I talked about Philip Grubauer is because I don't want us to be in a situation where in a season where we are already out of the playoffs, we find ourselves overworking our goalies. I don't want that to happen. And, again, 39 saves for Philip Grubauer in a shutout. We love that he got his 22nd shutout. 39 shots on goal by the Coyotes compared to 25 shots on goal for the Seattle Kraken. I showed you the game flow chart. Face-offs, we did win the face-off battle. So I love that at a 57.4% clip. We were 1 of 3 on the power play while keeping them only on the power play one time and shutting that down with a penalty kill. So, just some things to keep in mind. We avoid the sweep from Arizona. So I love that for us, but still some things that as we go and move forward, we need to improve upon. And so you look at a 5-0 score and you're like, oh, we're good. We're in good position. Yeah, it's a little bit more than that. It's a little bit more than that when it comes to what this team really needs to do to build better habits, which we haven't had good habits. Yes, we've been injured. Yes, we've had to deal with that, but we also have not had good habits, and that just can't continue. We're going to close out the show hearing a little bit from Dave talking about that development process, but then also I promised that we'd talk about Jeff Baker's article about Dave himself and what his future is going to be, because I think some of what he's able to do, especially now that the team knows that they are not going to be in the playoffs, arguably that's a little less pressure, but maybe not for everyone. And Dave might be one of those people at the top of the list where this is crunch time. It's kind of show me season. So we're going to talk about that coming up on today's episode of Locked On Kraken. Today's episode of Locked On Kraken, as I mentioned earlier on the show, brought to you by our friends at Game Time. I travel a lot, and my busy season's coming up. It's switched around a little, but anyway, my busy season for travel is coming up, and I love using Game Time when I'm in a city that I don't live in, and I have some downtime. Now, it's not always that I have downtime, but I love being able to find tickets for me and my friends. We go to M's games a lot. I've talked about that before. And what I love about Game Time is that, whether I'm buying tickets last minute which usually I am, I can save up to 60% off by buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, etc. There's also flash deals and zone deals. You can save when you choose a specific section and let Game Time choose the seats. You can save with in-app deals. So definitely make sure you're downloading the Game Time app. I'll tell you how you can do that in a minute. All-in pricing. This is huge. I mean, I use some other apps, mostly delivery apps. The delivery apps are like wild. But, you think you got a good price, and then there's all these other fees and stuff. Toggling feature shows the total upfront with no surprise fees at checkout. I love that, Game Time. I love that. And of course, there is the lowest price guarantee. Game Time will credit you 110% of your purchase if you find a better price than what you got on Game Time. So it's time to take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use promo code Locked On NHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. But again, go create your account over at Game Time. Download the Game Time app. Redeem code. This is important. Redeem code LOCKEDON NHL. Locked On NHL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Make sure to tell them that Locked On Kraken sent you. And, listen, this is a tough time to be a fan of a team that's not in the playoffs. And, I don't know if it's worse to just miss it, to just make it. But either way, it's an uncomfortable feeling to not be in whatsoever. And I think Dave is doing his best to really keep the focus, and I think he needs to. Again, there's a lot. We're going to get into it in the off season when we really have some time to focus on the Seattle Kraken solely. I mean, we'll keep up with what everyone else is doing, but we're mostly going to focus on the Seattle Kraken. There'll be some time to do some of that, but I think Dave is doing his best, his darndest, to keep the team in good spirits, but also keeping them motivated. Here's what he had to say after practice today.
Well, it's goaltending's backbone of any good win, of any good team, and those two guys have done a good job. We've talked about it all year. I recall coming into training camp, right? Who's number one? Who's this? Who's that? I mean, we have a tandem, and those two guys have done a nice job of it. When one's been, when one's been injured or down, the other one has been able to pick up that slack and do a good job, and they've supported each other very well in that way. We've had a lot of nights where we've given up very little. We've given up 20 or less shots. We don't give up a whole lot in terms of opportunities, and that's a challenge for a goaltender then to make the big save at the right time. Last night was a night where Groovy had a lot of work in the second period. He had a lot of quality work, and he did a great job for his teammates. Yeah, no, there was Joey had a nagging issue that we wanted to make sure he had a chance to get fully over. I mean, behind the scenes, there's a lot of things that with all of the young players that are in our lineup that we want to obviously we want to celebrate some of the success and some of the good things that are happening, but I mean, on a daily basis we break things down, and there's a lot of details to the game that need to be given attention and continue to be improved upon. Well, last night was a night where we were able to reach that identity. There's been nights throughout the year where we haven't been able to get off to that good feel offensively. Last night was a night where we go out, we score a goal early, our power play has success early, and that sets us up for a successful night. These are players that have a chance to become important players for us. Keep our feet on the ground here. It's a real process to grow and develop into this league. We'd like to be sitting in a playoff spot, getting ready and prepared for playoff round number one. That's not our reality. So we have the opportunity to have some of the young players come up and be around our veteran players that are going to continue to be very important for us. and give us a glimpse of what they may be able to provide in the future, as well as along with that, and equally as important, gain valuable experience. Well, I mean, those are things that we'll get to as they, as the decisions are made for, them to return to Coachella. We haven't had those discussions with them, but each individual is going to learn something about their game. That experience is invaluable. There's only one way to go through it, and this time of year is, when you're out of the playoffs, it's a little bit different in terms of the true pressure of the NHL. So, in some ways, there's a benefit to them to be able to experience this, in that scenario. But ultimately, each individual has to take away, some of the things that, can be, as I said, real areas of strength, as well as certain areas of their game that have to improve in order to be a effective and full-time player at the level here.
So there you heard from Dave, talked about Joey Daccord, which I talked about earlier in the show, talked about the goalie tandem, but then also, again, some of the young blood and what he's doing there. And I think it's important because, again, and this is an article that I think you should check out if you haven't already read it, because it came out a few days ago. I talked about it the other day. But, there is a conversation regarding what is the right move when it comes to Dave. And I think it's fair to say that he could absolutely be part of the move away from whatever we saw this year. And so, I appreciate Jeff doing the work here. He was able to get some confirmation that Dave's job is secure, at least for the next handful of games here. But who knows what happens after that? So we're trying to get through the 9 games. This was 4 games ago, trying to develop some kids. I don't really like using the word kids, but that's the direct quote. Trying to develop some kids and trying to look at some things for next season, Francis said. So, that's more my focus at this point, as opposed to finding a new head coach. And this was right before the win against the San Jose Sharks. That's our next opponent. Hakstol being safe this season is very different from his remaining. So then Jeff writes this, quote, worth noting, Hakstol being safe this season is very different from his remaining so once it ends. Francis wasn't tipping his hand on that. And then he goes on to quote Ron Francis. I mean, that's always something we do at the end of the season. We evaluate where we are. What we did right, what we did wrong. This should be no different. We look at all those things, but I don't want to get into speculation at this point. We know that the Seattle Kraken made a move. I think it was even before they did exit interviews, and they got rid of their goaltending coach and brought in Steve Briere by season 2, who I think has been an improvement for the Seattle Kraken. So this is very interesting. I think the language that Jeff is using, and then presumably him using that language because he deduced that that's very specific language that Ronnie Francis was using, is very interesting. But if you're a Locked On Kraken insider, an everyday or an OGer, I've also been wondering if maybe there's a worthwhile conversation to see how the front office has been doing. I don't think that this means that Dave is out of the hot seat, and some of what happens in the next handful of games, for me at least, is going to indicate that. I don't think that the coaching staff that we have now is able to get a better defensive performance from the team that we have now. So is that a coaching issue? Is that a front office issue? Is that a player issue? I think it's a little bit of everything right now. But if I were a GM or an owner, I would be looking at how we're going to improve defensively, but I've been saying that for years, so you already know. Ya tú sabes. But the point being that, yes, there are a lot of things to figure out. And just like Dave said, or just like Jeff said, excuse me, yes, being safe for the next 5 games is not the same as being safe for next season. So this is something that we're going to have to talk about. I want to bring in some other people to have this conversation as well, because I think you kind of know how I feel, but I think there are people that are ready to move on from Dave. And I guess the question then becomes, what do we need from a head coach if Dave is not the answer? I think he's a very process-oriented guy. I love that for him. I think moving forward, him working even at the front office level and helping with the pipeline, I could definitely see him doing something like that, because I find him to be someone who wants to lean into that process. Will he have enough leash to do that now with this team, with the Seattle Kraken? I guess that's a question to be answered, which is very different than where we were last year when we got extensions for Ron and for Dave. But what a difference a year makes, or something like that. All right, folks, I'm going to let you enjoy the rest of your Wednesday, but we will be back with another episode of Locked on Kraken. Until then, be kind to yourself. Be kind to one another. Hold fast. Stay true. And we say loud and proud, especially on game days, let's go Kraken. I'll catch you on the next episode. Peace out.